All right, everybody, welcome back to Matt Lewis and the News. Please pre-order my book, Filthy Rich Politicians, available for pre-order everywhere now. Thank you for rating and reviewing us on iTunes. Thank you for supporting us at patreon.com/Matt Lewis. Happy to welcome back to the podcast, friend of the show, Tom Nichols. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic, a curmudgeon, a cat guy, a democracy enthusiast, and a defender of experts. Tom Nichols, welcome back to the news.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's good to be back.
Great to talk with you again, as always. Let's start with Joe Biden. I don't know when, by the way, I don't know when this will air on the audio podcast. We got to back up, but those who are watching at youtube.com/Matt Lewis are seeing us pretty much in real time. Joe Biden has announced today. Before we talk about Joe Biden, writ large, what did you think of the video?
It was okay. It's polished. It's, he's got a very nice media operation. You saw that during the convention too. I thought a lot of the video at the convention was pretty good. I mostly was just kind of focused on the message, which was, gotta finish the big work and all of that, which is a pretty typical second term message.
Yeah, I don't want to read too much into it, but I will say this. I think Biden's announcement in 2020 was very telling. Do you remember what his theme was?
At the convention?
No, his announcement video.
No.
I'll tell you what it was. It was Charlottesville.
Oh,
It
right.
was very Charlottesville heavy.
That's right. It was. And it was I wasn't going to run, but I somebody's got to put a stop to all of this, and it's going to be me. Yeah, I remember the Charlottesville message.
So I'll give you my sort of initial. So, but basically, I agree with you. It's well done video. It's polished and all that. As a conservative, never Trumper, at the opening, there's like a keep abortion legal sign that kind of rubs me the wrong way. There's a lot of Kamala Harris, which I think is not great. Those are the two things. If I were like nitpicking things that bugged me, those would be the two things.
Well, I think I take your point about Harris. I mean, I wrote a piece, again, depending on when this airs, weeks ago or yesterday. I just had an Atlantic piece where I said, some of the concerns about Biden are really concerns about Harris because people her numbers are lower than his. She's never quite gotten out of that cellar she's been in. And I think it was interesting that they just leaned into it and said, look, we're not playing this game. We're not dumping anybody off the ticket. She's part of the team. And I thought, okay, that was a very confident way to go, right? Rather than sending some kind of subtext message to the faithful saying, well, she's in charge of swimming pools and crochet industry and all that stuff. I mean, which is, I think like you, I'm not crazy about Harris, but I think it was the right way to go as a re-election message, especially to your own faithful who were with you the last time.
You got to do what you got to do, right? And as you know, African American women are the.
I think you've been,
and no president, including George H.W. Bush, wants to say, "Oops, I made a mistake with my running mate." Right? You can't do that.
And it's not sure that he thinks it's a mistake, and that I think he would have opened himself up to criticisms of chickening out or bowing to pressure, or if your message as the president of the United States is I'm large and in charge and I'm solving the country's problems, the part of that is, and no, I'm not just going to dump my Veep just because some of you don't like her. I think with the abortion message, it may have rubbed you the wrong way, but man, I think considering how the Republicans caught the car on this, the dog's chasing the car.
Yeah.
It's not the wrong message, especially if the election is going to be decided by a lot of suburban women.
No, I hear you. I was actually on Morning Joe, depending on when you hear this, either yesterday or 2 weeks ago. And by the way, the more we do this, the more likely it is it will be bumped up in the queue and that this will be like the first one out of the gate. Sort of talking about the abortion issue. And how I think, even though I'm pro-life, I think we could acknowledge that this has become a political problem for Republicans, especially Ron DeSantis going with this 6-week ban as opposed to 15 weeks. Regardless of what I may think about that ideologically, uh, probably not terribly popular with the soccer moms that may decide the next election.
Well, and not. I think it's not popular with a lot of people. People who have moms and sisters and daughters, and people who want options that they feel are, available to them, even if they personally, would be anguished about it. And I think part of the problem here, and you and I were just before this, we were talking about Charlie Sykes, because Charlie's kind of written about this and wrestled with
You
it.
were off air. You were really dissing Charlie Sykes,
Oh
and
yeah,
I
right.
was defending him. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Charlie, the only thing I'll say is Charlie's a dog guy and I'm a cat guy, and we have a non-aggression pact there. But I think Charlie and others have pointed out that these bands, there's kind of a viciousness and a cruelty and a kind of sneeringness behind them that belies the whole culture of life approach that a lot of conservatives, that you and others, have been part of for a long time. I've written about this. My mom almost died from an illegal abortion, so I'm very much in the women. I've said I don't know what I would have done, but I don't know that I want anybody else to have made that choice for my mother. But I think part of the problem is that these bans are they're almost trolly. It's like, well, we didn't outlaw abortion, we just limited it to 6 weeks, which again, it just comes off as sort of cruel and sneering and not really about
Well, it's kind of
life.
consistent, and it's consistent with DeSantis's like what he did with immigration, right? The whole Martha's Vineyard thing, which look, I thought made it was making a point, but it was also a troll. We got to be honest; it was a gimmick, and real people may suffer as a result of making this political point that is also trollish.
Yeah, and I think I think the Republicans, because increasingly, you and I long ago would have said liberals live in a bubble. I think now it's the Republicans who live in the thickest of bubbles, and they just don't understand that. Nikki Haley just today, or depending when this is, 3 weeks
2 weeks ago, yeah.
just today, Nikki Haley said, "Look, you're not going to," and I think this is why she's not going to get close to the nomination, because she accidentally told the truth again. That you're not going to do on a federal level what they're doing in North Dakota, because North Dakota just did the 6-week thing as well. You're not going to do what you're doing in Florida, and I think a lot of those eventually, over the next few years, are going to get rolled back. And I think people don't want abortion to be this giant lead pipe that we all swing at each other. And I think they never wanted that. And I think the Republicans in their bubble have misread the public, because the public was never in favor of this. The public, I like to think that I'm closer to where the median voter is, of sort of anguished. I was really uncomfortable. When I was working in Washington 30 years ago. I remember there was a march. People had the on demand, without apology, kind of in your face. And I thought, man, that's not going to fly either.
Yeah.
Most people are in the middle. They find this to be a difficult moral, an anguishing and difficult thing. And these kind of, again, this kind of sneering, well, all right, fine, 6 weeks, and kind of just twisting the knife. I just don't think that's going to go over. And DeSantis, because you brought up Ron DeSantis. DeSantis is the worst at this than anybody. Like there are places, North Dakota did it today, and they said, okay, we're a pro-life state. We believe in this. And they kind of just did it and kept it on the down. DeSantis just always, I think the guy's kind of weird. And I think
he is kind of weird. I think that's demonstrable.
Yeah. So I think it's bad enough to do it. But it's really bad to look like a kind of a sneering nerd while you're doing it, because that's not what a culture of life is about. It's not. That doesn't convince anybody on any side.
You made an interesting point earlier. We talked about it used to be liberals who were living in a bubble, and now it's Republicans. Well, I think when I talk about life, when I talked about life on Morning Joe yesterday or 2 weeks ago, I tried to do it in a way that was ironic and hopefully persuasive and hopefully compassionate. And part of the reason is that I try to be that way in real life. But part of it is that when I was growing up and coming of age politically, it was impossible to be a conservative who lived in a bubble. Like there wasn't a bubble. Like you had to exist in the mainstream media, and occasionally you could go on Fox News or something. Once it existed in 1996, you know, when I was in my 20s or something like that. But by and large, if you wanted to change the culture, you couldn't imagine doing it on a right and solely in the right way. It didn't exist. You had to go in the mainstream. And so we were always playing road games. So we had to be really good at talking in ways that presented our best, most compelling argument.
I was smiling and I was kind of chuckling while you said that because I was a college student during the first Reagan term. Like I started college in 1979 and I graduated 83. And of course, this was, the period of high Reaganism in Boston. I went to Boston University, so it was like to be a conservative, like you say, you were just living in everybody else's. I had a Reagan book. Listen, I wasn't above being trolly myself at 21, I had a Reagan Bush poster on my window, now and then, and it was almost like, people were fascinated, like you were from some Amazon tribe. Wow, you voted for Reagan? Yeah, well, actually, millions of us did. But you're right that forced a kind of discipline on you because you were always, at least in my experience, as like a college kid, and then I went to a much friendlier environment, Columbia, New York, and you were always arguing with 3 or 4 people at a time, and you learned to juggle those arguments and to be able to hear the different versions of the opposition that I think, as you say, kind of made us better at debating and arguing. And I think now, that the right and the left have kind of swapped places on this. That people on the right, say things that not only sound that aren't just very good debate points, I would say, but sound crazy.
Yeah.
Because they're so used to talking to other people who don't turn to them. And, I've said part of the big problem with our national sorting is that there's nobody at the bar that you're sitting next to anymore who looks at you and says, dude, that's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody
Totally
you're with
true.
says, you're absolutely, yes, amen, brother. And I think that Republicans or conservatives or red staters live much more deeply in that bubble now than people on the left do.
Without a doubt. I'm actually writing a column right now, which may be 2 weeks ago or tomorrow, depending on.
This is a great running gag. It's like tune in tomorrow or 3 weeks from now, whatever.
But the conceit is, so I've done during the January 6th committee, I wrote a column. The conceit was like a letter to my MAGA aunt. And I was telling her, like, let me tell you what I'm seeing that you're probably not seeing on Fox News regarding the January 6th committee, right? So we'll see if this works, but I'm attempting to write another letter to my MAGA aunt, telling her about the weird shit happening in the Republican Party, like sexually. Like whether it's Rudy dressing in drag or Matt Schlapp's alleged behavior or Ali Akbar Alexander's alleged behavior or Madison Cawthorn's alleged, like there's a lot of stuff that I can't imagine my MAGA aunt, who by the way is just a composite of all of my MAGA aunts whom I love deeply, but let's be honest, they watch only Fox News. I can't imagine that they would be cool with a lot of the weird stuff going on, or even probably don't even know about it, right?
Well, I mean, first of all, for a movement that's terribly obsessed with sexual deviance, they sure seem to have a lot of them.
Like a disproportionate number. If Major League Baseball or the Catholic Church had this many prominent people engaged in this sort of behavior, you'd say there's a culture problem, right?
Well, and it does raise the issue of projection, and that although I've been fighting with people about what fascism means, there is that great line from Orwell, and that comes from, I think Wilhelm Reich, right? That's, all that marching up and down is just sex gone sour.
Well, I
That
do think that there is some overcompensation and some repression, but I don't think that accounts for all of it. I think there's
no,
like that's like 5% of it.
I think it goes back to your point about abortion, Matt. I think the whole thing about family and sexuality and deviance and abortion, it's an attempt to claim a moral high ground that is unassailable because you're losing the arguments in so many other places. I used to say that conservatives, of course, I was a Northeastern kind of liberal, squishy Republican, right? And so I was kind of the foreign policy internationalist, business is good, small government, we love small government kind of wing of the party. And I would always say, look, the Republicans won the economic argument. Every time people say to me, even now, trickle down didn't work. I'm like, no, trickle down is pretty much how the economy runs even now. No one's ever really overturned that. But the liberals decisively won the culture wars about premarital sex, about abortion, about
Yeah, and
marriage.
look no further than the Republican Party for evidence of that.
Yeah, right. I mean, these are not Republicans who have decided to take, the Benedict option or withdraw to their Amish farms. They live very, they're not very church going. They are, they have plenty of their own vices. And I think to kind of defend the tribalism and to defend the party position on whatever it is, to say those resentments. And I think when we get talking about people like Tucker Carlson, I think it's just about cultural resentment. Say, well, you can't assail my position because I'm in favor of the family and the babies and the children and decency and good. And that gets you off the hook for having to argue about what should the economy look like? What should we do about the unfortunate or the poor among us? What should we do about foreign policy? You just say, well, I'm part of a morally pure team because I care about babies. And I think it really is an attempt to kind of put a kind of force field in front of themselves that is morally unassailable. The problem is, if you're going to do that, you can't be in a movement full of people like Ali Alexander.
Yeah. Which, by the way, people may not know. I don't really know Ali, but I've been around Ali for 15 or 20 years. I mean, we were like conservative bloggers together, back in the blogosphere, back.
Well, I blame your generation. I'm like 10, 15 years older than you guys. See, you blogging kids, this is where it all went wrong. But
I knew once we started with that WordPress, it was a slippery slope to propositioning allegedly teen boys. But we'll move on. Let's go back to Joe Biden. Let me just give you my take. Well, before I get to Joe Biden, let me go back to Kamala for a second. I hear what you're saying, which is that Biden needs to project strength and certainty, and you can't go throwing your running mate under the bus when you're trying to say, we're going to finish the job and all that. But there's no, John Maxwell, the leadership guru and author, says, without a successor, there is no success. Joe Biden may be enough to beat Donald Trump, but I don't know who's next in. If Joe Biden, God forbid, were to die tomorrow, I don't know what would happen. There clearly is not an obvious successor who could win.
Yeah, but were you voting that way when George H.W. Bush had Dan Quayle behind him? I mean, I think one thing that Biden probably knows, because he's a pro and because he's got a campaign full of pros, vice presidential picks don't really have that much impact on the general election unless they're really great or really terrible.
True. Okay, true. But let me just push back slightly. Normally, presidents aren't 82 years old.
Well, that's also true.
And normally, the other option isn't Donald Trump. Right. So in this circumstance, one could argue it is especially important that we have someone really good waiting in the wings.
Well, I'll tell you what I said in the piece, and I believe this, even though I regularly get yelled at by the K-Hive. If something happened to Joe Biden, I believe that the vice president with an able team of, a cabinet and administrators would be a reasonable steward of the White House. My expectations would be very low, but it wouldn't, be like worrying about what would happen if Sarah Palin became, president. Because I voted for John McCain, but boy, did I have to choke that down. But I think this issue of an obvious successor. I think that's, I'll just say, I think that's why you don't bring business school into politics, because I think people just don't think that way about the presidency and the vice presidency. And the other thing I'll say about Harris, there was no, other than saying, well, she's got low approval ratings, people don't much like her. There was no scandal or major moment where there was an opening to say, okay, you know what, for the good of the party. There was no, checker speech that she had to give. There was no, which Nixon survived, by the way. There was no Agnew court moment. There was none of that. So, to just sort of, I still kind of get it as a matter of strategy, even though I wish he had a more effective vice president. But I get it as political strategy that you're not just going to kick her off the ticket for no reason. In the same way that Bush did not kick Quayle off the ticket. Yeah. And let's face it, if not for Ross Perot, if not for Pat Buchanan, Dan Quayle didn't make the difference. Was this, 92 insurgency. Dan Quayle would have been a second-term vice president. But you're right, George H.W. Bush also wasn't 82 years old. Which is
first, let me say my main concern with Kamala Harris is actually not how she would govern, but that she could not win, that she just turns people off and is awkward and is unelectable. Second, what's the K-Hive?
Oh, the K-Hive, the online Kamala Harris fans.
Okay.
That, if you say anything bad about Kamala Harris, it's like, poof, and
some people,
it's like Taylor Swift or the online. Yeah, it's just incredible.
DeSantis has a pretty defensive, thin-skinned online mob as well. What do we call them? The D-Hive?
No, I don't think DeSantis's supporters. I mean, DeSantis has a lot of people who come after him if you criticize him because they're just so desperate to have an alternative to Trump. Whereas, with the K-Hive, it's definitely, it's like going after a celebrity. It's like going after Justin Bieber or something. And there was actually a piece recently I want to say it was the Daily Beast, where it was talking about how they've been a little quieter over the
good stuff written there.
What's that?
Good outlet. Very good outlet.
I think that's where it was saying, and I linked it in my piece where it said they've been a little quieter lately because, she hasn't exactly lit the world on fire as a vice president. But
the DeSantis people are very angry at me specifically.
Everybody's angry at you, Matt.
Well, but here's their.
You and I weren't speaking until I got here, for God's sake.
They have a logic. Their logic is, oh, you said you didn't like Trump, and you said you're a conservative. Therefore, you must only say good things about Ron DeSantis.
Oh yeah, I've gotten that, and it's like they come at you and say you have a positive obligation as a conservative to support the best alternative to Donald Trump. And my answer is, first of all, I'm no longer a registered Republican. I'm actually, maybe I'm one of the few. I'm happy with the way Biden's governed. I'm very much a foreign policy guy, so I'm really happy with the way Biden's handled things. But this notion that you are positively obligated to help out, especially for somebody like DeSantis. I mean, it also, I'm sure you've gotten the charge as well, right? Well, you just want Trump to be reelected because that's good for your rating,
totally,
or whatever it is. I dread Trump being the nominee because it's bad for democracy. It's just bad for our culture. It's bad for our country. That doesn't mean that I have to cheerlead in some insincere way for Ron DeSantis, who, I think is pretty awful. But I would, if it were up to me and I had to pick these are the only two Republican nominees to run against Joe Biden, of course I'd pick Ron DeSantis. He's not a sociopath. Well, he's not nuts. I mean, Trump is just nuts, and he's dangerous. He's far more dangerous.
Yeah, I would vote for Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. but I also have to write 3 columns a week, and my obligation to my audience is to tell them the truth as I see it. So I can't root for I'm not let's just say it, I'm not Jen Rubin, right? I can't root for someone. I have to tell the truth, and you know what the truth is, that Ron DeSantis is not running a great campaign the last month, and people don't like him. He's not likable. He seems weird, as you said, and maybe he should have been nicer to members of Congress from Florida.
Well, and maybe he shouldn't be trying to pick off Trump's voters by being Trump. Which I think is also part of his problem, because when faced with a fake Trump or a real Trump, people are going to
Yeah.
take the real thing. But do I think it will be good for the country if Donald Trump is renominated? Absolutely not. And I really hope that doesn't happen. But that does not then place positive obligations to help the campaign. First of all, the people that have a positive obligation to stop Donald Trump start at the Republican National Committee and go all the way down from there. I said this in the piece yesterday, 3 weeks ago, whenever we're talking, but I said this in my piece where I said, look, the real change, the time that you would know something has changed in the Republican Party is if Ronna McDaniel and all the Republican elected say, listen, we are not going to give money, time, exposure to a sociopath who instigated a violent, seditious insurrection against the government in the United States. We're just not going to do it. And if we lose an election over that, we lose an election over it, but we're not going down this road with this guy. And that would be the first step to recovery of a Republican Party that could really contest elections and win them, in 4, 8, or 10 years. But they're not going to do that because it's all presentism. If we lose anything, if we lose one state legislature seat, it's the end of the world. And, the Visigoths sack Rome. They've really convinced themselves of this. And I think your point about telling your readers the truth. I wrote a similar piece recently where I said, look, when Tucker Carlson's emails came up before he was canned, I said, you're not always going to like what I say, but I'm not going to lie to you just to keep you, opening the Daily every day or reading the Atlantic. I just can't. There's no point in it. And I think that is just a decision that a lot of people on the right have said, expediency and winning rules everything. And then they project it back onto people like you or me to say, well, why aren't you being opportunist and expedient? And, it shows how dysfunctional that whole movement's become.
I'm going to keep this tight, but since you mentioned Tucker, I want to turn to him in a minute, because depending on when you're listening to this, he's either in the news or was in the news. But first, let me just give you my take on Biden, right? Because everyone, is saying Biden's too old, his popularity is low. All those things are true. But, Biden's line where he says, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. People have slogans. I'm not sure there's ever been a better slogan that actually encapsulates a candidate's unique selling proposition better than that. What do you think?
It's up there with vote for the crook. It's important. I mean,
was that Nixon or who?
I think Americans have become very, and you're singing my song here, because Americans are like, well, I'm not excited. He doesn't excite me. Well, that's politics isn't about being excited. It's about civic duty and making choices among the alternatives. I especially blow my stack when people say, well, I don't like any of these candidates. Well, did you vote in any primaries? Well, no. Did you vote in any off-year elections? No. Well, then,
yeah.
Gosh, how does this keep happening? Ask the voters. And it's really infuriating. And, is Biden a perfect candidate? No. Is he better than the crazy authoritarian ignoramus that's trying to take over the government again? Absolutely he is.
Don't blame me. I voted for Rubio. I'm just waiting for that bumper sticker to arrive any day now.
It's still one of the great embarrassments of my life. My old boss, Dick Nixon, on Twitter, chooses never to harass me about this, but I really thought for a while, okay, it could be Rubio if he just, around Trump back in 2015, 2016. And I think it shows how, corrupt and decrepit the entire Republican Party has become, that nobody that the only person who came close to Trump is a kind of guy who imitates him with the hands and the pinkies, and it's a dysfunctional party right down to the grassroots.
All right, let me get you out of here on this. I'll
Yep.
set it up with a long setup. So as you know, I worked for Tucker Carlson for 6 years at the Daily Caller, and he was an awesome boss. I mean, he was like a mensch. He was super cool. I will say, if we had recorded anything that honestly any of us had said during those 6 years, it would have ended his show and this podcast probably. So, who knows what may be out there floating around. But I think he was beloved in the office by pretty much everybody, and I think he earned that. Um, Having said that, as you might imagine, our political views have diverged, and we differ profoundly on a lot of politics. So I guess the question I have for you is, A, what is your reaction to his being fired? And B, and this is the one that I think is sort of philosophically neutral. Where does he land? Does he land at Newsmax? Does he start his own video podcast, Tucker Carlson and the News? What say you, Tom Nichols?
Well, first thing I'll say is I'm going to take you because you and I have always had a cordial relationship. I'm going to take you at your word about being a mensch, but I will point out that Rolling Stone reported that literally there were cheers and clapping at Fox when he got canned, because sometimes popularity and ratings and money can turn people into real jackwagons.
I just watched a face in the crowd the whole way
Yes.
through, so I'm familiar with this phenomenon.
Well, it's quite possible that whatever he was as a person years ago, what he turned into was a venomous kook spewing some of the most toxic lies and injecting them right into the American political bloodstream. So my initial reaction is Schadenfreude. I mean, it was I got in right under the wire. He took some shots at me about a month or so ago, so I made the cut just before he got tossed off. And I think it's generally a good day for America and a good day for democracy if he's not on television. Where does he go from here? The problem is, once you've climbed the mountain, I mean, there is nothing higher than the 8:00 slot at Fox, right? At least in that world. I don't see.
You could argue that Joe Rogan. He wasn't 8:00 at Fox, but you could certainly argue that Rogan is bigger now than he was as a mainstream media figure. But that's kind of the end of the list, I think, right? I mean, Howard Stern was bigger. Howard Stern was bigger on terrestrial radio than he is now, I think.
Yeah. And I think Rogan's not a great comparison, because he goes from stand-up comedy and the world of entertainment, and he starts doing a podcast, so he's got millions of people listening to him. No matter where Tucker goes, it's going to be backward. This has led everybody to think about, could he run for president? I would guess that if his ego is smarting as much as I suspect it is, it's in his interest to say, well, I'm thinking about it. To have the courtiers all show up and say, because, in that sense, I did a thing yesterday where Mike Madrid was on, and Mike said he's perfect for the typical, GOP entertainment lane, right? He has no government experience. Everybody knows him. He's, transgressive and says hateful things. I think the problem is that, Trump would just eat him alive and spit out the bones. And I think he knows that. But I think that there will probably, this is my guess. Of course, I could be right or wrong by the time this airs, but there might be a little Tucker boomlet. And then I think it's, I don't know, write a book, hit the top of the bestseller list, go on tour, go get the love. I think that, and this is, you knew the guy, but this is my theory watching his evolution. He didn't need the money. This was about psychic income. This was, I got fired at MSNBC. I got fired at CNN. By God, I am not getting fired again. I am going to make it in this business. And he did. And I think I'm very interested in the stories that say Murdoch just decided it's time to remind the stars that nobody's bigger than the network. And just, sent him on his way. Yeah. Um, this I'm going to put in a plug. By the way, this is so. I think I mentioned to you at one point. I'm going to be on Succession.
Oh,
I have
I
a
didn't.
bit.
No, I don't think I knew
I have
that.
a bit part on Succession
That's
in a
big.
couple of weeks as an ATN pundit. Yeah, you probably won't even hear me say anything. You might see me on a monitor as people walk by or something. But oh my God, this is like, hey, let's remind it's time for a blood sacrifice, and Tucker is a pain in my ass. He's cost me a lot of money. He's got all these other lawsuits going, and who does he think he is? And he's out. So my guess is whatever it takes to soothe that burn is what comes next for Tucker. But again, you knew him. It seems to me that he fell into that trap of, it was a Beatles problem, right? We're bigger than Jesus now. And, the head of the network says, yeah, you might be bigger than Jesus. You're not bigger than me. And so I just don't, but I mean, I genuinely don't know where he goes. That doesn't feel like, I mean, unless he becomes the king of Newsmax or OAN or something and says, I'm going to stick it to Fox by, revenge. I shall have my vengeance in this life, or the next. But I honestly don't know, Matt. I mean, once you've been, especially because of the way he was fired, it's like, I said to somebody the other day, it's like when federal employees screw up with classified material, right? Hand over your badge. These people are going to walk you out. Don't touch anything on your desk. Your email is off, and you'll hear from us. That was a pretty humiliating way to get the boot. So if I were him, if I were the person I think he is, I really want some payback for that somewhere on Fox, but I don't know how you do that.
We will stay tuned to Succession. What else, Tom Nichols, would you like to plug?
Tune in a couple of weeks. I think, well, again,
this could have been last night, depending on when.
I mean, right. I think I'm in episodes, at least as I recall. By the way, I don't know what happens. My scripts were blacked out. I had a named character with lines, but any lines that weren't mine were just all blacked out because, like, I didn't even know. Well, I won't ruin for people that haven't caught up on Succession yet. I didn't know the big twist in episode 3, so I was just a bit player that got to hang on the set and watch real actors do their thing. But if you're on Twitter, I'm at Radio Free Tom, and of course, please come to the Atlantic, sign up for the Daily, where we will bring you through the news of the day every day. And other than that, that's all. That's all I got.
All right.
That's more than
plenty. Great talking to you. Always a pleasure, Tom Nichols. Thank you for coming back on the news.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to see you.